It's been 60, 70 years. He's been one of the leading proponents of South Carolina and of the United States. And so, Secretary Rowley, we are very honored to have you here. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Gene, and thank you all, as Greg said, for being here on this very important subject, especially with South Carolina and the 10 counties represented here. It's a real honor for me to be here to introduce your main speaker. First of all, Rendell is a very close friend of mine, and a person that I've admired for years, and I have a tremendous respect for him. The second reason is you could not find a more highly respected, passionate, committed, experienced leader in terms of transportation and infrastructure, the subject of this meeting. 34 years in public life, he has really provided the laser-like attention on the subject of infrastructure. He was the mayor of Philadelphia for 8 years. In Pennsylvania then, and he was governor for 8 years. In our nation, he's led the charge for significant investment and attention to infrastructure. He's tenacious in his view on this investment, as those of you have spoken. But actually, he's interested in getting the job done, realizing that simply being passionate and being concerned about it as important as that is the first stage, you really have to get the job done. You have to complete it. And he's very effective in his effort to be responsible and responsive. As governor and as mayor, he cut wasteful spending, improved efficiency, revitalized the community, improved education, dealt with the environment in a serious way, expanded health care, and so forth. Philadelphia Renaissance, Philadelphia is a wonderful city, but it's a complicated city, just like all major urban areas are. But Mayor Rendell was hailed by the New York Times as, and I quote, the most stunning turnaround in urban history. He balanced the budget there. He generated a consecutive 5 years of budget surpluses. A great record as mayor. That's when I was coming along in Washington. Ed has been and continues to be a strong leader of the Democratic Party. And as strong as he is as the national Democratic spokesman, and any of you watch news programs from time and time again, he really is significantly more interested in progress than he is partisanship. He continues that priority now in private life, creating an organization, building America's future. Interestingly, the 3 people that really started it were Governor Rendell and Mayor Bloomberg of New York, and former Governor Schwarzenegger of California. And now he is one of the co-chairs really of this organization, along with Mayor Bloomberg and I think Secretary Ray LaHood. The interesting thing about all these people who are in the leadership roles there are Republicans. And of course, Ed Rendell is Democrat. That's how he operates. And that's how they operate. They wanted to provide a service and get the job done. I might say that the president of this organization is a beloved friend of mine, Marcia Hale. Marcia Hale is a South Carolinian from Aiken, and she was headed up my Washington office when I was governor of South Carolina. And when I went out of office, I turned her over to Bill Clinton, and she worked in and out of the White House ever since. Anyhow, you're very lucky to have Marcia. You realize that, I hope. I want to say to you, please share with us your trademark candor. Ed is going to tell us how we might proceed and invest in opportunities we have in infrastructure and building our upstate into the future. It's a pleasure for me to introduce the Governor Head Rendell.
They said you got to hold on to the podium piece, right? Pleasure to be here and an honor to be introduced by Governor Riley, who I think is one of the best governors in U.S. history. He did a great job for South Carolina. Things with Bill Clinton in his role as Secretary of Education, where I got to know Dick. They made many advances that are benefiting states and localities today. So Dick, it's an honor to be here and an honor to see what you all have done in Greenville. Greenville looks great. Downtown looks fantastic, and I know that this is an area that has had experienced tremendous growth already, but has even better growth potential. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am here obviously as one of the co-chairmen of Building America's Future. Building America's Future was founded in 2008 by, as Dick said, Bloomberg, Governor Schwarzenegger, and myself. Mayor Bloomberg and I go around the country and speak about these issues, but Bloomberg provides us with funding, help, as does the Rockefeller Foundation. Governor Schwarzenegger was a potent advocate for us in the biggest state of the union in California. But his greatest contribution to the whole infrastructure debate, and Dick and I were talking about this outside, 10 years ago, most Americans couldn't tell you what infrastructure was. It wasn't on anybody's radar screen. Today, it is an issue of significance, and we're moving the ball forward. There's reason to hope. But Governor Schwarzenegger's biggest contribution was in 2008, the night before our press conference in California, his 8-year-old son saw on his scheduled infrastructure press conference, and he said, "Daddy, what's infrastructure?" And Arnold said, "It's what Daddy used to blow up in the movies." When you think about it, it's about as good a definition as any. So we have made progress, but as Greg told you, the overall picture is terribly flawed. Infrastructure affects us in 4 ways. And by the way, Greg and I know that we are mostly preaching to the converted here. But we want to equip you with information and reasons to go back to your communities. And not necessarily talk to people in the business, but talk to Kiwanis clubs or Rotary clubs or Out clubs or your local Chamber of Commerce. And get people thinking about the need for us to invest in our infrastructure. Get them to start thinking about what is the consequences of failure to act. Because we haven't acted in a long time. We haven't invested in our own growth in a long time. And the results of that failure to invest are very, very crystal clear. 10 years ago, the World Economic Forum rated the American infrastructure as the best in the world. Today, we rank 12th. In every category of infrastructure, we rank below countries like Iceland or Panama or Albania. Our rail system, our ports, our roads, our bridges, 66,000 structurally deficient bridges in the United States. Roads that are in terrible condition. And what does having a not first-rate infrastructure do? Well, first of all, it endangers our public safety. How many bridges have to collapse and people have to die before we finally go to our streets and do something about this? You know, when the bridge in Minnesota collapsed, when the bridge in Washington collapsed, there was a big hubbub. For 30 days, people said, we've got to get busy, we've got to invest in our infrastructure. Boom. 30 days later, everyone forgot about it. They went on to some other issue. It's not just bridges collapsing, it's pipelines bursting. It's road conditions. 1/3 of all traffic fatalities in America, 1/3 are caused by poor road conditions. 1/3 of the thousands of people that die every year in America from traffic accidents are caused by poor road conditions. So our public safety is jeopardized when we fail to act. Secondly, our quality of life. Greg gave you some very important statistics about how much time people lose stuck in traffic. Not just time that they could be watching soccer games, but time that they could be at work. It hurts our productivity, there's no question about it. And it burns gasoline. It's bad for our environment. Nothing's worse for our environment than sitting in traffic with your motor on idling. It burns gasoline and pollutes the air like nothing else does. So it's our quality of life. That's the second reason. The third reason is our economic competitiveness. Our economic competitiveness is hurt dramatically in the global economy by our failure to move goods quickly and efficiently. Let me give you one example. Don't know if any of you have heard of something called metallurgical coal. Metallurgical coal is the food stock for the production of coke, which in turn is the food stock for the production of steel. And metallurgical coal is not found in every coal-producing country. For example, China is a big coal-producing country, but they don't produce any metallurgical coal, so they have to import all of it. Two major places in the world that produce metallurgical coal are Australia and the United States. And normally when we compete with a foreign country, we're at a disadvantage because of labor costs. But in Australia, the labor costs are roughly the same as coal mining costs are in the US. But the difference is, Australia can get its coal from where it's mined to its port cities by road in 1/4 the time that it takes American coal to be either trained or trucked to our port cities. And as a result, the only time we're ever asked for metallurgical coal is when Australia can't meet the output and the demands that are needed. And coal mining jobs that pay $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year, family-sustaining jobs are lost. And I can give you examples until 6 o'clock tonight of ways that we are hurt in the world marketplace because of our infrastructure. The fourth area is jobs. Now, if you're like me and you think it's right, I try not to be partisan. This is something that Republicans and Democrats are guilty of alike. Everyone talks about the need to produce middle-class jobs, family-sustaining jobs, well-paying jobs. But nobody does anything about it. Nobody does anything about it. The Republicans' idea is that cut taxes and eliminate regulations. That's what George Bush did, and what followed, George W. Bush, and what followed was 5 years of the slowest economic growth in the country's last 75 years. It doesn't work. Democrats have good ideas, but we can't get any of them in operation. The U.S. Department of Transportation estimates that for every $1 billion spent on transportation infrastructure, it produces 25,000 jobs. And these are well-paid jobs, jobs that pay $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. Family-sustaining jobs. And not only do they produce jobs on the construction site, but jobs in American manufacturing factories, in asphalt factories, in aggregate factories, in concrete factories, in steel factories, in lumber factories, in paint factories, you name it. I wasn't sure that that statistic was accurate. You read about statistics all the time. Well, it just so happens, Pennsylvania got, while I was governor, $1 billion in stimulus money for our roads and our bridges. So I decided with my staff that we were going to track that $1 billion to determine exactly how many jobs it created. So when a bridge was to be repaired with stimulus money, we made sure we knew how many workers were on the bridge. But we did something else. We found out who the vendors were that produced the products necessary to repair the bridge. We went and interviewed the vendors. How many jobs did you add back? How many new hires did you make? And all told, for that $1 billion of spending, Pennsylvania created not 25,000 jobs, but 24,682. So if we spent the $200 billion on infrastructure that Greg and the ASCE says we need, anyone do the math quickly? What 25,000 times 200 would be? I'll do it for you. 5 million well-paying American jobs. Now, we're not going to spend $200 billion more, but if we spent $100 billion more, or $25 billion more, you see the effect it's going to have. So if there was one thing that could improve our public safety, improve our quality of life, make us more economically competitive, and create good paying jobs, wouldn't we act to make sure it happens? Of course we would. But we're not. And why are we not? Well, we're not in part because there's ideology. Anybody here know who Grover Norquist is? Raise your hand if you know who Grover Norquist is. Grover Norquist, you would think he's the most powerful man in Washington, D.C., because he's got the Congress of the United States and a lot of state legislators paralyzed because he makes them sign pledges that they won't raise taxes, they won't raise revenue. Before they even get into office, before they know what the issue is, they sign away their ability to raise revenue. Well, if you've ever seen Grover Norquist, he's a pretty unimposing guy. It's like the Wizard of Oz. When you pull back the curtain, there's no there. Nobody ever voted for Grover Norquist, and yet he's paralyzed the government in many ways. And we've got an ideology that says government's bad. Government spending is evil. Government can't do anything right. Well, government makes mistakes, and there is government spending that's wasteful. There's also government spending that's vitally important. Name me one company in South Carolina or in Pennsylvania or in any state in the union that has grown successful without investing in its own growth. You cannot. Companies become successful by investing in their own growth, by investing in R&D, by investing in new product lines, by investing in new factories. That's how you grow. And we understood that. When we were a young country, we understood that. I'll get back to that in a second. So, we've got an ideology in Washington that says we're going to do nothing. In fact, it's even worse than that. There's a bill, and one of your congressmen is a co-sponsor of this bill, called the Transportation Enhancement Act. And what it does is it devolution, devolves transportation spending to the states. That sounds okay. States can make those decisions better than the federal government. But it takes the federal government share of transportation funding and cuts it by 80%. So consider this. Right now, the federal government gives states $45 billion a year for their highways, bridges, and roads. By 2019, this Transportation Enhancement Act will cut that figure to $8 billion. Cut it by more than 80%. It would take the $8 billion that we give under the Highway Trust Fund to mass transit and totally eliminate it. Mass transit would get no federal support going forward under this act. Now, for the average American state gets 52% of its transportation funding from the federal government. South Carolina is an exception. You get 82% of your funding from the federal government, which means you have one of the lowest state gas taxes in America, and you do, I think, the third lowest. You haven't raised it, as Greg said, I'm sorry, as your director said, you haven't raised it since 1987. And it's 16.7 cents, but if you adjust it for inflation, it's now worth 7.8 cents in terms of its spending value. So South Carolina would be absolutely crushed by the Transportation Enhancement Act. And yet one of your own congressmen is signed on as a co-sponsor. Somebody's got to explain that to me. It doesn't make sense. So not only is there an attitude in Washington that says we're not going to act, but there's worse. There's an attitude that says we're going to lay off this entire problem on somebody else. We'll take Pennsylvania. When I was governor, I commissioned a Transportation Reform Commission to look at our needs. And they came back and said to have a first-class infrastructure. Pennsylvania, we're much like South Carolina. I think we have the second number of highway miles in the country, even though we're the sixth largest state. It said we needed to spend $3.5 billion a year more than we were spending. I tried to get that through the legislature. I couldn't do it. I had a Republican legislature. But after I left, a Republican succeeded me, and he, with my support and other Democrats around the state, came and supported his legislation. Got an increase in the gas tax. It's called an excise tax, but it gets passed down to the pump. Of over 5 years, 28 cents a gallon increase. It will produce $2.5 billion a year in additional funding. but it still leaves $1 billion gap. And that's in a state that's making a maximum contribution to where we are. If the Transportation Enhancement Act passed, Pennsylvania would have to raise its gas tax another 16 cents a gallon just to be level, just to be even. Now, I testified with Rich Trumpka from the AFL-CIO and the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, a man by the name of Frank Donahue, at the first hearing of last Congress's Transportation House. They had a new chairman, he's from Pennsylvania, he asked me to testify. And there were 60 out of the 80 members there, and every one of them spoke, and every one of them said, yes, we understand we need transportation funding. Yes, I'm a Tea Party member, but I understand we've got to find a way to fund transportation. Every one of them pledged their understanding of the need, and yet nothing happens. Why? Well, one of the things Dick didn't tell you, because in the interest of brevity, so I wrote a book when I left office, and I titled my book, The Nation of Wussies. And the subtitle is, How American Leaders Have Lost the Guts to Make Us Great. We don't have secret ballots, and in a democracy, we shouldn't have a secret ballot. But if we had a secret ballot, the Blumenauer bill, or the bill sponsored by a good Republican senator by the name of Corker in Tennessee, raising the gas tax by 12 cents a gallon and indexing it to the construction index so it goes up every year, that bill would get 385 out of 435 votes in the House and 85 to 90 votes in the Senate. Because everyone in truth knows we need it. But they're afraid. They're afraid. They're afraid if they vote for taxes, they'll lose. President Obama never came out for a gas tax increase because he was afraid. Everyone's afraid of the people. We think the American people are a lot dumber than they are. People understand you get what you pay for. You buy a car for $35,000 a year, you expect that car to run better than a car you buy for $17,000 a year. And it does. You get what you pay for. People in this country, over 70% approve transportation referendums when they're on the ballot, calling for more spending, calling for more tolling, calling for an increase in sales tax or an increase in the gas tax itself. For specific projects, people overwhelmingly pass them. People aren't dumb. You know that increase, that whopping increase that Pennsylvania passed? Not one state legislator who voted for it got beat in last year's elections. Not one. Primary opponents raised it against them. General election opponents raised it against them. It was the Democrat who voted for the increase. The Republican used it as an issue at the general election. If it was a Republican who voted for the increase, the Democrat used it against him. Not one was defeated. Not one. And if raising taxes meant political death, you'd be looking at a guy who would have been a one-term governor. When I became governor, I inherited a $2.4 billion deficit from my Republican predecessor. We also had a situation in Pennsylvania where we didn't spend one nickel on early childhood education. I wanted to spend $500 million on pre-K, full-day kindergarten, and after-school tutoring. So we raised taxes my first year in office by $2.7 billion. Now, one legislator who voted for the next increase lost in the next election, but everyone said it was blamed on me, and I would get crushed in the next election. When I ran for re-election, I won by 21 percentage points, by a margin of 21 percentage points. Because people saw that we gave them something in return. They saw our economy go from 46th best job creation in the country to 8th best. They saw their kids go into full-day kindergarten instead of half-day kindergarten. Smaller class sizes, pre-K, technology in the classroom. They saw all the tangible results of government investment. Now, I'm not a believer that government should spend money willy-nilly. But government needs to invest in our progress. My last year as governor, I was on one of the Sunday shows on ABC. And the moderator showed me a clip. He said, "Governor, watch this clip." And the clip was of a congressman by the name of Mike Pence. If that name sounds familiar, he's the current governor of Indiana. And he was doing quite well until he went on one of the Sunday shows and wouldn't answer a question about what the Indiana Freedom of Religion Act did or didn't do. But Mike Pence was the Republican chair of the Budget Committee. and he was speaking at the CCAP convention. The CCAP convention is the conservative convention they hold in Washington every January. And he was pounding the roster, and he said, guess what the party of no? We're the party that says no to taxes, no to borrowing, no to government, no to spending. Clip edited, and the moderator said, Governor, what do you think of that? And I said, it's a prescription for disaster for America's economy. You've got to invest in your own growth or you won't grow at all. So Fox News, never wanted to avoid controversy, asked Congressman Pence and myself to come on the air the next Sunday. We came on the air, and he spoke first, and he gave the same riff. And then it came time for me to speak. The moderator said, what do you say, Governor? And you're taught in our business to always look at the camera. But in this instance, I didn't look at the camera. I turned and looked at Congressman Pence. And I said, Congressman, you seem like a reasonable guy to me. Well, truth be told, he didn't seem like a reasonable guy. But I've done enough TV to know that you want to be the good guy. So I said, Congressman, you seem like a reasonable guy to me. Tell our viewers how we're going to maintain our roads, highways, and bridges in safe condition if we don't invest in their maintenance. There was about 13 seconds of silence. And on TV, 13 seconds of silence is a millennium. Congressman Pence, now Governor Pence, is a very smart man, notwithstanding his recent performance on TV. He's a very smart guy. He was grappling with an answer to that question, because it's a pretty tough question to answer if you're not going to invest. Finally, he said, the best he could come up with, there you Democrats go again, using the word invest when you really mean spend. No, Congressman, you mean invest. You invest in things that build value. You invest in things that create value. You invest in things that make us safe. You invest in things that improve the quality of our lives. You invest in things that make us economically competitive. You invest in things that will produce high-quality jobs and restore American manufacturing. That's what we do. And you know, we need to get the word out. We need to get the word out. Greg did a great job of telling you the cost of inaction. The Texas Transportation Institute, not exactly a liberal body, came up with a fact that Greg didn't mention. They said the average driver spends $818 a year. $818 a year because of our inferior transportation system. It comes in two ways. The money you waste in gasoline, idling in traffic, and the damage to your car, damage to axles, damage to tires. I have a friend in the north who had a terrible winter, and we're one pothole from Oregon to Massachusetts. My friend lost 3 tires in potholes, costing over $1,000 to replace those 3 tires. Cost of a 12-cent gallon increase federally is about $125 a year. $125 a year. $125 a year if we act, $818 a year if we don't act. Now, I want you to go back home and tell your local papers, your local radio stations, tell your community groups, tell your neighbors to write their congressmen, write their senators, and tell them it's okay. We need to give them a permission slip, a hall pass. It's okay to vote for an increase in revenue if we're going to get something out of it. It's all right, don't worry, we'll be with you. We're not going to, we got your back. We need to develop some guts, some courage. We are a nation of wusses now. The sad part is, we can do better. Building America's Future has got an app, and the app is called I'm Stuck. And when you get to your hotel room or back home tonight, Google I'm Stuck. And if you sign on to our app, tell us your address, we will automatically send, whenever you want us to, a message to your two senators or congressmen saying, I'm stuck in traffic. These roads are terrible. Congressman, senator, you have the power to do something about it. Do something. I'm stuck waiting on that airplane on the tarmac. I've been here for an hour and 10 minutes. The plane hasn't taken off because our airports are too crowded and inadequate. Do something about it. You can get that message, you can write your own message, or you can send in a pre-written message that we have for you. We've got 11,000 of those apps already, those messages that have come into Congress. I want us to see us get 111,000. Because congressmen, senators pay attention to their mail. More attention than I think they should, but they do. So, we've got to give them courage. And it's sort of sad, because when you look back over American history, we always had the courage, we always had the guts, we always were brave enough to do what was necessary. We were always risk takers. Think about 1776, when those men in Philadelphia signed the Declaration of Independence. That was the ultimate risk. We were a nation of shopkeepers and farmers going to war against the greatest fighting army and navy in the world, the British Empire. It was like Appalachian State beating Michigan in football. We had no business winning that war. And think about the men who signed it. They weren't revolutionaries like in Russia or the French Revolution. They weren't the poor and the starving. They were the landed gentry. They were the richest people in the colonies. They were doing it for an ideal they called freedom and democracy. What does our Declaration say? It says we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. They had fortunes to pledge. No other revolutionaries in the history of the world had fortunes, but ours did. And they weren't afraid. When John Hancock signed, and we've all seen the Declaration, he signed it extra large. He was the president of the Continental Congress. The other delegates asked him, John, why did you sign in such large print? He said, so King George can see my name and hang me first. They knew exactly what the risks were. And at every time this country has needed strong, courageous action, willingness to invest and take risks, we did it. Thomas Jefferson signed the legislation for the Erie Canal, even though members of his own party said it was too expensive, we couldn't raise the revenue, and the engineers said it wouldn't work. But he understood if we were ever going to open up the Midwest to commerce, we needed to build the Erie Canal. We built it, and it worked like a charm. Abraham Lincoln, think of this, in the middle of the Civil War, in the middle of doing things like emancipating the slaves, he found the time and the effort to build the transatlantic railroad. Because he knew if we were ever going to open up the country from coast to coast, economic vitality and growth, to take advantage of the resources in the West, we needed to build that railway. People said, you can't afford to do that in the midst of the war. The engineers said, you'll never get the railroad tracks over the Rocky Mountains. But he did it, and it worked. Dwight Eisenhower came back from leading the war effort, became president of the United States, and he knew that if America was going to reach its full economic potential, we needed an interstate highway system. And Dwight Eisenhower, Republican, Abe Lincoln, Republican, Dwight Eisenhower invested boatloads of money. That $200 billion Greg talked about was little compared to what Ike invested in the highway system. He invested in and built the interstate highway system, and it worked like a charm. It made this country the envy of the world. We took risks. We did difficult things. You know, I grew up, when I was in college, John Kennedy was our president. And like most college students, we idolized JFK. And he made many wonderful speeches, asked not what your country can do for you, asked what you can do for your country. Some incredibly florid, poetic phrases. But the Kennedy quote that I like the best was a press conference he held the day after the Russians launched, not Sputnik, but launched the first missile into space that orbited the Earth. And everyone was panicked. The Russians were going to beat us to the moon and take advantage of space and use it militarily. And he pledged at that press conference that America would have a man on the moon before the end of the decade. The scientists told him that was impossible. It was too short a time period. People in his own party said it's too expensive, we can't waste the money. He said, we do it. We did. He didn't live to see it, but we did. And when he was asked why he was doing it, he said, we do these things not because they're easy. We do them because they're hard. We always have. We always did. It's what made us and kept us the greatest country in the world. And ladies and gentlemen, if we don't invest in our infrastructure, if we don't build back our transportation system, if we're too scared of Grover Norquist and his ilk, then we're not going to be the greatest country in the world. We're going to have to be satisfied not with being 12th best infrastructure, but being 20th or 25th best infrastructure. And our economy will decay, our public safety will continue to be endangered. It's not going to be a pretty picture. So that's why I came down. This is Stand Up for Transportation Day. I don't know if you know that. All over the country, transportation rallies are being held. I spoke at a rally in Philadelphia with 500 people outside in the cold. It was 39 degrees this morning in Philadelphia. And there are rallies being held all over the country. It's time that we, the American people, lead our leaders. If our leaders won't lead it, they don't have the courage to do it. We're Americans. We know what made our country great. We've got to deliver that message. So sign up for the app. Preach the gospel, the message. Let's get it done. We're Americans. We set our mind on it. We can do anything.